Mr. Hapka, good morning. You're very well known in Berlin. You do a lot of good things here. What makes you so successful? Oh, what makes me successful? I think in my life, professionally speaking, I've often switched from one sector to another, service sector to another. I think because basically I'm very open also for quirky biographies, as long as they are exciting challenges, especially, for example, in the service industry, which fascinate me and with which one can also fascinate others. And I think I can adapt pretty quickly, as long as I'm interested in it. And I can develop a lot of passion, invest passion in management. Passion for the issue, passion for the people that you want to get things going with. Okay, passion. Well, I think that's really important in anything you do. But what's your philosophy in life? What vision do you have? Do you have anything particular that made you what you are? I think a few things have made a mark on me in my life. When I was very young, it was music. I think that was the area where you only experiment and you can discover things, be really open, have open ears, open eyes to everything. And throughout my youth, I was very heavily involved with that. I wanted to make a profession of it, which actually didn't work out. But I think the discovery that is essential to making music, that openness, I think you can apply that in your life to a lot of other fields, and it helps you a great deal, that openness. Not having preconceived ideas. And something else which set its stamp on me, someone who's at home in the service industry, are my early years in the hotel trade, where you learn to work in a very flexible way, to be very aware of the client, the guest. You want to make their stay a pleasant one, and you simply have to be very flexible in what you do. I think that period in the hotel trade was a big influence. If you try from those periods in your biography to take on elements for your philosophy, for your private life as well as your professional life, then I think you're always developing, you're always learning, probably subconsciously, but you always take something with you from your professional chapters, but also from your private chapters. I read that you played battery as a young man. Was that the music? Battery is, I think, probably the French word, or probably Italian, for percussion. So you're very assertive. Yes, that too. I suppose as a drummer. I tried for a few years with more or less success in various different bands and in different genres of music. But yes, as a drummer, you have to be a bit assertive, but a good drummer is really good if he places the percussion in the service of the music, in the service of the song that you're playing. And the requirements can be very different. You're not playing against and despite the other musicians, you're playing for the piece. That's something else that you can learn and use in other ways. If you're talking about either being assertive or placing yourself in the service of something else. Something that strikes me, how do you apply that to your family life? How do you reconcile family and job? Yes, reconciling your job and your family is a challenge, especially when I think of the times when you have to travel a lot and the family often has to be left behind for a few days, a few weeks, because you're traveling the world. That has happened. There have been hefty periods of that in my life. And then you have to be there all the more when you are at home. I think the biggest challenge is really to be there for people, to pay attention to them when you're with your family, not to be wandering with your thoughts, thinking of your work, but really to be there for them and listen. I have an 8-year-old son, for example. And those moments, the happiness that I feel when I listen to him, as he tells me things he's just realized, things he's thinking about at the moment, and he tells me about what's happening in his head, and I'm really there listening. Those are incredibly fantastic moments which make you happy. When you're with somebody and you can put yourself in their shoes. When you don't have it, when you're trying to do one thing here, your head's focusing on one thing, and a child is telling you something, and you just listen, and in passing you go, yeah, but you're not really listening. That's a challenge, certainly. But if you really do manage to be with them, then you've gained a great deal. My profession or my tasks, fortunately, have always had an element of that interest, that openness for my family. So they've been able to come to my job in my previous company, Aspria, and the same at O2 here. It's very fortunate. I don't work in an office where perhaps a child finds very boring because there are only people sitting at desks. My professional environments have always been something they can understand and experience. That applies to my period in the hotel trade or when I was running an airline at Aspria and in O2. These worlds of experience are open to my family too. So my son likes to come and see me when there's ice hockey on, my wife, my daughter, maybe to a musical event here, or maybe the basketball. We have various different strands of entertainment here. And on a day like today, when there's a lot of work going on but there's no audience, there's a certain fascination to that as well. So yes, they like coming to see me at work. Yes, it sounds as though you're really a pretty cool father. Something to tell your friends, isn't it? I went to see Daddy at work, and yes, my son brought his class here once. We often do guided tours for schools, and of course I'm delighted if I have this opportunity, so that my world of work isn't something abstract that a child can't understand, but it's really tangible. They can understand it, they can see it. That makes it a bit easier. Well, let's come on to O2 and your new beginning here. What did you particularly enjoy about this new beginning? Well, of course, this step, becoming the manager of this project, had its appeal for me because I think that in recent years, since this big O2 arena has opened, I've been here, I'm sure, 100 times over, and I was pretty fascinated by it, because I am involved in sport, I'm involved in music, and as a guest I was interested in those things. I was always fascinated because they have this cutting-edge technology here. It's one of the most modern arenas in the world. But the themes we're talking about are pretty balanced. We're talking about 50% sport, 50% music. And ultimately, the decisive factor for me was that those are the two themes of my life that have influenced me ever since I was 10 years old. I've always been really enthusiastic and really active about sporting activity, but also music. And the idea that I have an opportunity here to take those two things and make my profession with them, I was absolutely sure it was the right thing for me. And now, after 5 months in the job, that's been proven. It gives me the chance again to be passionate about my job, because it's always fascinating, it's always exciting from those two sides. And from the beginning, I've loved it. Well, tell us, what does a general manager do? What functions do you have to cover? What many different things? Well, as the word general manager implies, a general manager is an all-rounder. An all-rounder who probably understands a little bit about all these different things, but doesn't really understand them in depth, I suppose you could say. And it really is that way. You have to take the ingredients that are part of a service operation like this, understand them down to a certain depth. The ingredients are, regardless if it's a hotel or a company or some other setup, an airline, an entertainment company, a lot of the ingredients are the same. You've got your human resources, your team. You've got the structure that has to be set up for the operation, that has to be managed and developed. There's the administration. There's the need to do marketing and sales. And then there's product management as well. And there, of course, there are differences between the different sectors, because you're talking about different products which you have to manage. Here it's events, so there's event management, and there's the content. Those are the actual products that we have to look at. In my previous company, of course, the content was a little bit different. Last time I was in the health sector. But of course, a lot of things are generic, and they repeat themselves in different areas with different people in different environments. The general manager, the all-rounder, has to be able to put himself or herself in the shoes of these different specialists. Sometimes it's easier. Facility management, for example, is what you do with a building, and that will be similar wherever you are. Of course, I'm not a technical engineer, but I do have to understand what we're spending all this money on, or why we're operating these services, because a lot of money is invested, and we talk a lot about sustainability, or perhaps less sustainability, and that may be something we want to come back to. But I also think that sustainability has a lot to do with HR management, contemporary HR management. It's a very burning issue, and I think in recent decades a lot of new paradigms have developed and shifted in that field through human resources. But can you tell us in more detail, so that we get an idea of your work, what is your day like? Well, first of all, I say good morning to all my staff, preferably with their names. Then I go into my office, and of course I do my correspondence. You have to answer a few emails, make a few phone calls, and then over the day, of course, you have a few appointments. There'll be appointments with staff, where we talk about quite specific themes, things we have to resolve, where we're looking together for decisions, or trying to initiate new things which are important for our operations. And there'll be appointments with people outside this house, with partners, where you talk about business. But really every day I always have one appointment where I don't have a clue what to expect. Perhaps I've met somebody and I say, fascinating person, really interesting. And where we've said, okay, let's sit down together and talk about this. And usually something comes out of it, which is an important part of business development, I think, that you're always open to new ideas and looking to see how your network, how the world of things, the opportunities we have, can be linked into what other people are doing in other companies. I think we've known each other for a while, haven't we? And I did this in my former company too. to move out of that restriction imposed by your own four walls and look around you. The more you move outside those four walls and look for new input that you can bring in, the more you can develop your company. So that is part of the appointment agenda. Something else that we have to do day by day is of course, as a venue, we have our evening events. So we need to be here and look around to see what's happening this evening. If 14,000 people are expected to see a match or a concert, are the logistics in place? Is the experience going to feel right from the point of view of the people coming in as a guest? Is it the way we want it to be? And that's the perspective we have to adopt. Because I say every day to myself and to my staff, for a lot of people who come here, it's either the event of the month for them, it might be the event of the year for them, and it might even be a highlight that they will remember the rest of their lives. And you have to be aware of that. We have a duty to make the best of it for them out of that experience that our guests who come in here in the evening are going to have. And that's what I'm very aware of. In the evening, of course, we have a lot of guests, performers to welcome. We have corporate clients who come in and out a lot. And of course, one is the host in the evening. As I'm familiar with from the hotel trade, I know what it's like in hotels as well, and I feel a duty. I wanted to stick with that theme for a while. Could we see you a little bit as a conductor of an orchestra? So you take all the instruments and you turn it into more by conducting than it would be if all the musicians were playing by themselves. So you're not just coordinating, you're drawing the best out of all of them, you're tapping into talents, you're recognizing opportunities, perhaps interaction, as you say, with people outside, interdisciplinary exchange. That's a very interesting comparison. With a conductor, perhaps it does have a lot to do with that profession of the managing director. Of course, you're not really playing the instruments yourself. The instruments are played by your staff, but the success of the overall thing is in the hands of the director. The conductor, or musical director, has to listen very carefully, including to those softer instruments, and perceive precisely what they're all doing, and all of that within a philharmonic ensemble, and turn it into what it needs to be. So, as I said, I think that includes listening to the staff in your company, if we're going to stick with that metaphor, including those who are perhaps sitting in the second or third row in the background, but they're very important to the success of the whole. A person on the service staff who makes the guests happy in the evening simply by being charming, by smiling, by being kind, or the sound engineer, who is of course responsible for the acoustics. The many different players and assistants in the background, you need to have an eye on them too, and an ear. That is indeed quite important. And ultimately, you initiate or stimulate or signal which direction it all has to go, perhaps a little louder, a little softer. But there's a lot you can borrow, I think, from that image of the conductor and his orchestra compared with the general manager in a company. Yes. And what do you do to inspire the audience in those many different aspects that you've talked about? Sometimes, of course, it will be a unique experience for the guest, and they'll remember it for the rest of their lives. But for you, of course, that shouldn't become a métier. What do you do to make sure it's always unique? Something that it's hard for us to influence or indeed predict is how are the teams going to play on the evening? Are they going to be energetic or mediocre or disappointing? And what about the performers on the stage? Are they going to be in form or not? Will they be able to rivet the audience, or will it be a fairly mediocre performance? Of course, that does not lie within our remit. What we can do is influence the totality of experiences which make up the framework. I think, for example, the condition of the building. How do people come in? How do they go out? What experiences does that bring with it? How can I see the stage? Is the acoustic good? What about the staff I come across from the entrance area through the service? Are the toilets clean? There are lots of things that we can take note of which are part of that overall experience. So many different aspects which play a part. And if then the performer or the team perform well, then it's a perfect evening, then it's an experience. And of course, what we seek to do here with every event, that's what we want to achieve. There are lots of little details that contribute to that. We could turn it on its head, perhaps, and say there may be a fantastic concert, but if the audience have had negative experiences on the way in and out, then overall it's not going to be that memory that it would be if everything was perfect. And my aim is for it to be perfect. Why are concerts and sporting events important? Because nothing in our modern world of technology can replace the live experience. It's always been that way, and I think it always will. The numbers, both in sport, in all the different sports that are being developed, not only in Germany, but elsewhere, the development of live music. The trends show that, particularly perhaps in times of crisis, the experience is very much valued by people. It's important to them. And especially bearing in mind the opportunities we have online in the media now, it's perhaps becoming even more important. Because there are lots of things I can do now on the net. Almost everything can be experienced now on the net. Film, image, text. But that cannot replace the live experience. And this is the motor of the music sector and the sports sector these days, that it can only happen live. And that's an interesting aspect which I realized when I came back into this whole area. It resists crisis, it's viable for the future, and never mind what opportunities the virtual world can develop, you can't replace that. Seeing a performer in the flesh, in front of you, live, or watching that match face to face. No television, no three-dimensional film can replace it. You're familiar with the dilemma that live music and experience is difficult in terms of carbon footprint. How do you think that dilemma can be resolved? Well, yes, of course, that's quite right. It's quite obvious that the events business is a major consumer of resources. All kinds of resources, but above all, energy, of course. When you have a big facility like this, you need a huge amount of energy, but also all kinds of other things which we consume. Water, or the waste we generate, potentially. We're talking big volumes. And of course the aim is to manage all this sustainably and to counter things that perhaps in the past might have been done heedlessly. To try to counter that, we have in the Anschutz Entertainment Group, which is of course a global player. We work on 4 continents, which is a huge benefit. We have over 120 venues, which means that in the last 10 years, we've seen trends towards sustainability in these venues, which means that quite a lot of good things have been done. For example, let me show you this. AG One Earth Sustainability Department. Every year they bring out a report like this, and they're looking very hard at all these things. There are things which are, of course, pretty standard. For example, trying to avoid waste by using deposit systems, trying not to generate waste with the food and drink. That has become quite conventional, customary now. And in energy, this year we're taking an important step, because at the moment we are building the biggest combined heat and power generator in Berlin on our roof, so that at least we can cover the base load ourselves, our base load for all energy resources. It's gas powered, and only during the peak periods when the events are on will we actually need to purchase power to cover that extra load. But of course that considerably reduces our dependence on the electricity market, because we'll have our own generator. And combined heat and power is still, in terms of energy management, a far more sustainable source of energy than buying your electricity in. So that's an important development. Water processing, water treatment is another thing we can do in-house. So there are lots of areas that we're looking at. And you can do a lot in terms of building structure, for example, with green roofs, or site development, which is also important to some extent. For example, if AG is trying to develop the site around the venue itself, we try to include as much vegetation as possible, plant trees and everything. But it also involves commitment where we are operating. We're looking at things like commitment to the social environment we have here around our venues. There are a lot of aspects to sustainability. There's in-house sustainability, and that includes human resource management, but also externally, out there in the community, trying to generate jobs locally, for example. These are all aspects which in AEG come under the headline of sustainability, and which we're trying to cluster and coordinate as far as possible globally. Of course, you have to bear in mind the different national laws and the differences between the venues, but I think we've made a lot of progress. Of course, there's a long, long way to go, certainly, but it's an interesting organization from that point of view. You've already achieved a lot, I know. Where do you still see potential, for example, for people arriving at events and the organization? Yes, getting here, that is indeed an interesting theme. We do try, and of course we have to provide a lot of space for car parking. We're just building a new multi-story car park with 1,400 spaces. But of course we always do try to encourage people to use public transport, which is of course the way that has the smallest carbon footprint. Of course we're really lucky here because we're in the middle of the city. Unfortunately, 10 years ago, in a city like Berlin, it was still possible to build a facility like this in such a central location. So we're absolutely in the middle. We've got light rail, we've got underground station nearby, we've got the bus and the tram. So a lot of people actually cycle here when they come from within the city. You can even come by boat. We have a jetty right outside. So we have shipping passing us. We have every mode of transport available. And I think that probably increasingly we will be seeing people use public transport and leave their car at home because it's simply easier. Of course, I have a tremendous privilege, and this is purely by chance, that I live just 10 minutes away from here, so I come by bike, weather permitting. And I hope, as I said, that as many people as possible will make use of those urban transport opportunities that we have here. But again, increasingly, I see car sharing. There are so many car sharing companies, especially in Berlin, and they have electrical vehicles. We see a lot of them parked around here. If you are a member of the scheme, you can simply pick one up. And for an urban area like this, there are so many smart ways to travel. I can hear your passion for Berlin. What makes Berlin so special, so attractive, so lively for so many people from all over the world? I think, above all, there are the many spaces that we have in Berlin for very many different service businesses. Of course, tourists still come to Berlin because of the history of the city, which you can see and feel around you for the last century. And there are so many exhibitions, museums, architectural monuments. It's all there, it's all real for people to experience. And that brings them in from all over the world. But there are also the things that the city has been doing in the last couple of decades. The cultural diversity, the plethora of venues, clubs, exhibitions, nightlife, the restaurants, which are so diverse all over the city, and also the diversity of hotel formats. So Berlin can be experienced very personally in so many different individual ways, probably more than any other major city in Europe. There's something for every wallet, there's something for every personal objective. Whatever you think is interesting, you can see Berlin from your personal perspective and take your own personal memories back with you. There are such diverse public spaces, this diversity. As you can hear, I'm still fascinated by it. I've been living in Berlin for 30 years, and every day I see Berlin with fresh eyes. For example, in the morning, when I take my short trip by bike through Treptow Park and I pedal along the river, the Spree, and I see all that fascinating development we've had along the river bank in recent years. Then I ride over the Oberbaum Bridge and I have that view into the center with Alexanderplatz. In a space of just a few kilometers, I see such diversity of architecture, of content, of natural space. And that for me is Berlin, those different worlds of experience that change every few meters. The urban design is constantly fluctuating. It's still exciting. And the culture, of course. The world of culture is so important in Berlin. But what I wanted to ask you is something that just struck me. You probably know that quote by John Lennon about life being what happens when you're busy planning other things. Do you share that view? What is life for you? Life. Life for me is the encounters I have with people which are so important and so valuable. That's people, that's my family, my friends, where you're there for each other, listening to each other, actually being there with each other, paying attention, listening, being awake to it, actually being there for each other. That is true life, and you can combine it with a great meal, with a good glass of wine. You can play music together, which I still enjoy doing, or you can just go out and experience something together. But that common ground you have with the people who are valuable to you is important. For you, that's life, right? Well, we've heard a lot of interesting things from you. What are your plans for the future? Where would you like to invest your energy? Well, as I said, life is not just your job. Over the last 10 years, because I used to work in the health sector, there's one thing I did learn. Sustainability begins at home. And that is important too. It's important for the future as well. It means, for example, that you have to take care of yourself too. You have to remind yourself, for all the challenges all around you day by day, that you need to look after yourself, your body, your mind, keep them in good form, keep them alert, fill them with things they need to ensure that you can sustain your own productivity for yourself, for your family, for the people around you, for your staff, so that you can give to them. So I have to look after myself a bit so that the others can benefit too. That has something to do with sustainability as well in everyday life. And I hope that for some years I can carry on working on themes as I am here, which fascinate me, which I enjoy working with. Here it's sport and music. And yes, I'd like to carry on doing that for the next few years. And I think that the possibilities for developing in a city like Berlin are excellent. There's still a lot to do in this operation here at this venue. Even if it's already been up and running for 4.5 years, it's still not finished, and I'd like to be part of driving that forward. With this team, we have fantastic people here all around me, fascinating people, and I'd like to carry on doing that. Right, passion, sustainability, sport and music, values, and looking after yourself, of course, you mentioned that, that's important too. What would you like to tell our users? Or perhaps that sustainability isn't just about those big questions like environment management, resource management. There are lots of little details that count. And sustainability begins at home. I think if you are a person that doesn't look after yourself, then you're not a good example to others. And I think that you need to set an example if you're trying to implement certain things or be a model. And if your enthusiasm for your professional objectives makes you forget for long periods of time your own needs, and you find yourself in a cul-de-sac again, you're burnt out, you're drained, perhaps a little bit too unhealthy with your own resources. And then your output won't be what you need it to be. So look after yourself. That's the message. Mr. Hapka, thank you very much for the time you've given us. Thank you.